The American electoral system, folks, stinks. It just stinks for lots of reasons. We have term limits for the president. Do we have term limits for senators? No. Do we have term limits for Congress? No. Many states have no term limits for almost any position in the government. But for the most important position, we did term limiting back in 1948 called the 22nd Amendment. And why did that happen? Well, they didn't want to see another president like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that is, the Republicans. And when they got power in 1948, they jammed it through to kill off the presidency as far as elections, put term limits in place on the president. So now we have a president who's dealing with senators who have, for 2 terms, have 12 years in office, and a president with only 8. 50% increase in power for a senator over the president. Now, this is idiotic. The main leader has to be out of office 50%, a third sooner than any senator elected at the same time. The other thing is we have the Electoral College, which was created in 1787 to 1790. And why was it created? Well, many of you know, but some of you don't know. Because slaves had to be considered 3/5 of a person. And the southern states had slaves. They wanted to count every slave, but they couldn't count them as one person or one vote. They had to count them as 3/5 of a person or 60% of a person. Therefore, they wanted 40% more for each slave for voting purposes. And what came out of that was the Electoral College. On top of that, the wealthy people of the time, since women couldn't vote, remember that women couldn't vote when the Constitution was formed. They were treated pretty much like slaves, and slaves had very little say so. But they wanted representation, so they established an electoral college that represented everybody in a proportional way. And the electors were decided by the states, state by state and or territories, whatever. And it went on from there to the present, and it continues from 1790 to now. And we've had presidents who were elected not by the popular vote, but by the Electoral College vote. And we saw Hillary Clinton lose to Donald Trump, which makes some people happy, but makes the system look ridiculous. We saw Al Gore lose to George Bush, had the popular vote, and one person in the Supreme Court decided that election. We've seen a lot of these elections in the past. 5 of the last 6 elections had the popular vote going to someone else, the electoral vote deciding the election. It makes young people who look at the system that way, and foreigners who look at our system, think we're really not serious people. And until World War II hit, and America looked like the country of strength and purpose, we were a country that was really backward country. We had suffered a huge depression in 1935, and that was in 29. A market crash, a market that was not trusted anymore. People were killing themselves, jumping out of buildings, all of that. Nobody had any money except the banks and a few very wealthy people. But there was no middle class. There was no average day traders or any of that kind of thing. The market was no longer trusted. And so here comes Franklin Roosevelt, who says, I'm going to pull things together. The only people who have money to help run the government are the wealthy. So we're going to put a wealth tax on them. This is what this man was why they did the 22nd Amendment in 1948. And this is why they did it. So he put a wealth tax on to get money in the government to finance building bridges and what have you, because when you do building of bridges, build dams, electrical power systems, all those things, when you do that, you put everybody to work. And wealth is created for everybody, who then in turn can invest in the country in different ways down the road. People making decent living with extra money want their money to grow. then you have a chance to do that. And he also created the infrastructure bank, which is going to come again. The wealth tax was put at 75%. Sounds like a lot of money. It is, but it's on people paying nothing on their income until they reach for $1 million. This is what FDR did. The next dollar earned after the first million, they paid 75 cents on that dollar and all dollars thereafter until World War II happened. And then that tax, in order to finance World War II, because the only people who still had money in 1941, that's when the war hit, were wealthy people. So they had to pay. I'd like to talk about what did the gangster who robbed banks, John Dillinger, say, I go where the money is. And the government has to do the same thing. They're going to operate and function. You have to go where the money is. You don't go where the money isn't. And you don't save the wealthy from making more money on the hope that they'll hire people. They won't, and they don't. And so here you have that. So FDR was elected again and again and again, right into the war. Remember, 91%, it happened, jumped. The next dollar went to 91%. And that stayed, it went to 92% all the way through from 1941, 42 till 1960. That meant Truman came into power, replacing FDR. The war was won. The electric grid was built. Who built that? The government, not corporations. And who benefited? The people generally. Power, electricity, farms in the West. At Hoover Dam was a Western electric grid basis. There were other dams out there that added to it, but the main one was Hoover. And it was named after President Hoover, who FDR replaced. And he was honored by FDR, naming the dam after him. So what also did happen during World War II, when it struck, was we would continue building things. And in order to get the whole country functioning, the Tennessee Valley Authority happened in Tennessee. Dams were created, hydroelectric power came about, and the electric grid spread to the east and throughout the east. And the country was functioning with electricity, wholesale, everywhere. Everybody was gaining. And what also happened was the war came to an end. And just prior to the war, the interstate highway system had come about. So here's FDR, one president, building the beginnings of the interstate highway system, winning World War II, and financing the electric grid, which we didn't have electricity in a lot of rural areas until FDR did this. And the country could not function without electricity. And then on top of that, they built the interstate highway system. The GI Bill put people to work and going to school and all of that, so that people coming out of the military after the war was won had something to do. The government was paying for all this with the wealth tax, and the infrastructure bank. All these things were financing the building of a modern America. This was when America was great again. We had someone talking about making America great again. I always thought he understood history. Obviously, this person who said that had no friggin' idea when America was great. Forgot all about the period from 1935 to 1980, when there was a wealth tax the whole time, when the interstate highway system was built. When Eisenhower left office, most of the interstate highway system was well underway and continued to be built after that for another 10 or 15 years. And that was all built by the government with a wealth tax, folks. And these presidents all were elected, Republican and Democrat, with the same motive. They all believed in the wealth tax and in the FDR and the New Deal. And the new friggin' deal. And everybody believed that he saved the country, put everybody to work between the war, between the WPA, the CCC camps for kids. All these things were done that way. But in 1948, Republican Party gained the popular vote, and so many parties, they decided to get rid of the and make the presidency term limited. The Senate was not going to be term limited, and the House was not going to be term limited, but the president could be, because they didn't want another, the Republican Party did not want another Franklin Roosevelt to come along and keep getting elected and elected and elected 4 terms. We move this up in time. We start to see presidents get kicked out of office. First, it's Kennedy gets killed. Eisenhower quits, resigns, ends his time. 2 terms. He's a very popular president. In fact, Eisenhower, had he decided not to accept retirement, said, "I think I'd like another term." Well, that was 1960. That meant he would have had to go against the 22nd Amendment. Eisenhower would have been more than likely elected 3 or 4 times. And there would have been no Nixon scandal, none of that, because he didn't like Richard Nixon very well. But let's say Eisenhower not subject to the 22nd Amendment, well, we'd have seen Eisenhower at least 4 times in office. He was then reelected because he was so popular. And then since we did have the 22nd Amendment, he had to quit. Here comes Nixon and Kennedy fighting for the presidency. Kennedy generally winning the election. Some people said he didn't. Some people said he did. It was a debatable point, close election. But the final winner accepted was John Kennedy, who didn't last but 3 years before he was murdered, assassinated. And then you move into LBJ, who steps in there and does the Civil Rights Bill, and he quits after, finishes Kennedy's first term and gets elected in a landslide for 1 more term. All this wealth tax is continuing. No term, term limited presidency who quits before he even has his 2nd term. And so then you come to Richard Nixon, who gets elected over Hubert Humphrey in 1960. No, not 60. It would have been. I'm getting my dates mixed up in my head here. Replaced LBJ replaced Kennedy, who died 65, 60. It was in 68 that Nixon was elected. And Nixon got himself in trouble in the Watergate scandal, and he was considered Tricky Dick, not to be trusted. Eisenhower said he didn't trust him. His own president, when he was vice president, said so to a number of people. But that was his reputation. He didn't last. Ford came in for a 1 term, finish up 1 term, and then get elected for 1 term. And then Ford gets booted out by Carter. Here we move into 1980. And the big deal, the big dog comes from California, who really knew how to mess things up. He wrecked California. That was Ronald Reagan. I always like to refer to Ronald Reagan as Ronald Rectum. Spell it either way, and you're correct. He wrecked the economy. He cut the wealth tax, and he would have been reelected till he died. Well, some people believe he died in his 2nd term from Alzheimer's. Was actually the living dead walking around. Brought down the Berlin Wall, so they think. I think differently. It was going to come down anyway. But nonetheless, he would have been reelected at least 3 times, but Alzheimer's would have got him, so he may not have lasted. And then you have George Bush Sr. running in 1988, who gets elected and becomes the president for 1 term, has to run against Bill Clinton. And there was the guy that from Texas, the little whiny guy, who ran, Ross Perot. Oh, yeah. Ross Perot, for those of you who don't remember or don't know the history, ran as the 3rd rail or 3rd party candidate who split the vote, which allowed Bill Clinton, an unknown governor from Arkansas, to come in and win. And Bill Clinton was a smart, handsome, clever guy. He comes in 1992, and he just really drops the debt. They tax the wealthy a little bit more, and they cut the military spending to keep things more responsible fiscally, because Democrats, frankly, are fiscal conservatives and Republicans are fiscal liberals and social conservatives. Republicans like to tell you what to do with your underwear. Democrats, well, there should be people. It should be this, it should be that, it should be the other thing. Nonetheless, Bill Clinton's get in. But if there were no 22nd Amendment, Bill Clinton would have been elected and elected and elected. He was that popular. He would still be in office today if he chose to be. He's young enough to do that. He was young enough. And 22nd Amendment stops all that. There would have been no, if it was the 22nd was gone, 22nd Amendment was gone, and term limits were gone for the presidency. Remember, there's no term limits on the Senate. Why? Ridiculous. And we know that's for the House and the Congress too. No term limits. So we have a president, Bill Clinton, who has no term limits. There would have been no George Bush Jr. who would have won or run. He would have lost to Bill Clinton. He's very popular. Bill Clinton, there would have been no crash in 2006. Bill Clinton would have made the economy go sky high, which is what he'd been doing. So there would have been no crash for Obama to save and clean up. Obama might have been the new vice president around that time and then got reelected later. But there would have been no Donald Trump either. Bill Clinton were not subject to the 22nd Amendment. There would be no need for a Republican to even think about running against Bill Clinton. He would have been that popular. If he chose to stay in office, even now, he'd be reelected. It's ironic, but it's true, because Bill Clinton is younger than Joe Biden. So there you have America today with its own foibles, the 22nd Amendment, Electoral College, and a whole bunch of other ridiculous systems that we put in place in a country that doesn't know what to do with itself. And now is flirting with an autocrat for president. Whether it's DeSantis, who doesn't know that censorship is against the Constitution, and he's put it into a bill on elections, and a number of other things. A waiting autocrat, a fascist, by any other name. Fascists are those who separate people and benefit one group over another. That's what Hitler was, a fascist. He said those people were less than, shut them out of government. They're not democratic when you do that. You just don't do that. You don't make elections hard for one side over another. That's what DeSantis is doing. And that's what Governor Abbott's doing in Texas. That's what a number of the governors in Arizona, the governor there is trying to do the same. And Pennsylvania is thinking about it, may not. The governor, of course, in Michigan is a Democrat. That's not going to happen. So in all the precarious states, there's several, and there's some other states that are trying to shut out the minority vote, the black vote, shut out the Hispanic vote. That's what's happening, folks. But the 22nd Amendment for the presidency is a big one. And really seeing this country on a precipice, because Donald Trump has put democracy in doubt. There's people who would rather have fascism than democracy. It's called the Party of Trump. I want to thank you for that. That's a viewpoint from the edge. Thank you very much, and subscribe to this if you find it of any value. If you want to eliminate one side over another, then you're in the camp of the fascists. That's where you are. Pretending you're not is not understanding what you are. Thank you very much.